everyone a big welcome. We're really happy to be virtually with you on the East Coast. And we are 14 universities at this event. There. Okay, what is the program? Oh, this is the first time we've had graffiti. It's interesting. But what's the program today? So opening on behalf of the universities, then Andre Haspels, the Dutch ambassador to the US, will give some welcoming words. And then we have Robert Dijkgraaf giving his keynote. Then audience Q&A. That'll be followed by breakout rooms per university, where you're going to hear updates from each university. Then we'll have a group toast. And then we will do some borrowing. And then we'll close with some closing words. A lot of us recognize this photo. This is the cue for the ambassador to address us.
And great to see such a great number of people. For me, it's an honor and a privilege to speak to you all. And of course, speaking to alumni brings me back to my own student time, somewhere in the 80s, I should say. I studied at the Free University in Amsterdam, so political science. Good to see some former students from the Free University. The University of Amsterdam was much too left at that time to study political science, so I went to the University of Abraham Kuyper. I learned a lot in those 4 years, and I think it provided me with a very strong scientific basis for the rest of my life. But of course, learning continues also after you've left university. I also found it fascinating that two of my oldest daughters lived at Uilenstede, the same place where I lived when I was a student. And some things in life go as a cycle. So it was also an emotional feeling to see that the place where you lived in the 80s was almost 30 years later, 40 years later, now be the house of my two oldest daughters. They've both left, but it was a great memory for me as well, also of my student time. And that's what I'm thinking about now when I speak to you and see you all. But of course, I won't speak too long. We'll be going to listen to Robert Dijkgraaf, but I would just like to say that I understand the importance of education, the value of scientific research, and that's what brings us all today. We've all studied, some long, some short, but we realize how important it is to have a strong scientific education as a basis. And I think that is fundamental for us to build resilient and just societies. It's fundamental to building fact-based societies, especially in a time when many tough decisions are being made. Decisions must be based on evidence, and they must also be understandable to all who are affected by these decisions. And sound decision making and confidence in decision makers comes back to education and trust in science. And maybe now more than ever, science is what we need to confront a number of critical global challenges that we are facing. And you know them all. Of course, the pandemic. There is climate change that we have to address. The increased digitalization and how we deal with it is very important. The migration flows. Inequality, how do we address the issue of inequality? And of course, democracy. I've read a part of the report of Freedom House today, stating that democracies are under threat now more than ever in Europe, in this country, in this part of the world. And that's something that we have to fight for, but that's also something that we have to address with scientific-based evidence that democracies are the best way of governing people and the best way of flourishing societies. If I go back to climate change, the other global challenge, let me just refer to what Bill Gates said. He said, my basic optimism about climate change comes from the belief in innovation. It's our power to invent that makes me hopeful. It's our power to invent, to innovate that makes me hopeful. And that's what we need to do. We need to let science guide us in determining the urgency of the issue. We do that here from our embassy in Washington, D.C. We do it in our 5 consulate generals all over the country. We do it in our trade offices and in our innovation network. And I would like to thank Mark Duitenmeijer for helping us to prepare for today. But I see in our missions that there is a renewed trust in science. And we'll also see this under the new Biden administration. Let me just give you 2 examples. Of course, the fact that this government joined the Paris Agreement again, the climate agreement, very important, but also the fact that President Biden elevated the Office of Chief Science Advisor to his cabinet. So a higher status for the Chief of Science. And that inspires me. That is very, very important. And of course, as ambassador, I'm also inspired by the many Dutch men and women that I've met here. Unfortunately, not so much as I would love to do because of COVID, but I've met quite a few, some digitally, some in person. They've come here to pursue careers, to further their studies, to start or to grow a business, or to join the love of their lives for new adventures. And let me just mention a few examples in that regard. And I'm going to read them out because I don't want, well, I'm sure I'll miss somebody because I already saw in the list of participants many familiar names, also from our CGs and our embassy. But I would like to specifically mention the late Henry Termeer, who pioneered groundbreaking treatments for rare diseases and founded Genzyme in Massachusetts. I'd like to mention Yanti Suripto. I saw Yanti. She is the leading Save the Children in the United States. Yanti, I hope we will be able to meet again and to discuss the state of affairs of our favorite soccer club, which is doing quite well currently, both in Europe and the Netherlands. I'm thinking of Michiel Mos, who is supporting his wife during her postdoc in the United States. I'm thinking of Tom Witschik-Kruid and Karin Legebeke, who moved here during the pandemic for a job opportunity and proved their resilience in finding ways to flourish. I'm thinking of Tiffany Odeber, who recently furthered her studies at George Mason University to advance her career in foreign policy. Very good. I just saw Monique Benema, a former colleague of mine from the embassy in Vietnam, where we worked together in Hanoi. She moved to the United States together with her husband Art and a wonderful family, also to pursue a career here. And I'm sure I'm missing out people, but these are just examples. And at the end, of course, I should mention Robert Dijkgraaf, of course, our distinguished keynote speaker, who is heading the Institute for Advanced Studies, as you know, in Princeton. So these are the people that inspire me, that I've met. I hope you all will be ambassadors for the Netherlands based on your study on science, but also not only based on our interest, also on our values that we stand for as the Netherlands, important in these days. And again, I'm happy to see so many Dutch and American women joining us today. And I'm looking forward to the speech of Robert Dijkgraaf. So thank you very much. And it was great seeing you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So let me pass the digital platform off to him so he can start his talk.
Thank you, Joe. It's absolutely lovely to be with you. I will be sharing my screen, if that's fine. And it's great to be here, you know, and see all of you. I myself studied undergraduate and PhD in Utrecht. I'm a professor in the University of Amsterdam. But I think the most wonderful thing of tonight is to see all these universities together. In fact, I feel I'm an alum of the University of the Netherlands. And you know, the Netherlands is an important country, but of course it's not the largest country in the world. And I remember landing in Schiphol with an American colleague and explaining to him how large the Netherlands is. He says, "Oh, that's what we call a shopping district." And so it's great that we are all together, because I think that's one of the key qualities of the Netherlands, to connect and to do things together. In my brief time tonight, I want to talk about a large topic, share some thoughts about the future of science and technology. And of course, we live in completely crazy times, but it has also reminded me that, you know, we have been here before. This is an image from the New York Times magazine from 1941 that I like very much. It's about my own institution here in Princeton. Of course, there's Einstein with his looming shadow on the blackboard. And I love the title, Seeking Eternal Truth in a World of Chaos, because, you know, we are in the midst of a pandemic, But of course, we shouldn't stop thinking, and the future might come earlier than we think. Sometimes I think, I've been privileged to study quantum mechanics because, in quantum mechanics, you can be of two qualities at the same time. And I think that's a little bit what I need if I look at the present time. Because on the one hand, things are paralyzed, are frozen. On the other hand, things are rapidly progressing, are accelerating. And so parts of technology are going much faster now than we thought. I think the CEO of Microsoft said that, he saw 2 years of progress essentially in 2 weeks. And I must say all our universities too, I think they within a few days, they were able to adapt to the new world. So it's a little bit like you're pressing the pause button and the fast forward button of life at the same time. And perhaps, if you're lucky, we can also find the reset button, because I think this could be a good time to rethink what we're doing. Now, if we talk about technology, there are several definitions. These are some of my favorites. Everything that was discovered after you were born. Our children don't think of the internet as technology. It's like electricity for me, or running water. Another definition is everything that doesn't work. Clearly is technology. But of course, it's also the dominant force that shapes and changes both nature and culture. And important thing, it's already here. It's in the minds and the labs of scientists and scholars. And a few years ago, I published this book, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. Actually, it's a title written of an essay written by the first director here of IES here in Princeton. And there's this wonderful fact that there are these things that look useless to us in first instance, but then turn out to be extremely useful. There is an anecdote that Michael Faraday in the 1830s in England was doing his experiments with magnetism, electricity, to great amusement of audiences. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, so Minister of Finance, visited him and asked him, what's the purpose of all of this? And Faraday said, well, I've no idea, but one day, sir, you may tax it. And I guess we all pay taxes on our electricity bills now. And I just wish he had patented the laws of electricity. Would have been enough to support all research forever. But there are many things unknown, and I'm always very fond of these ancient maps. So which I think is nice because they show on the one hand what was known. That's our the land, and then that people knew, and then there was the empty spots in the map. And these old cartographers, they didn't dare to leave these spots open, so they painted these kind of sea monsters in it. And I often feel, in science, what we're doing, we are conquering these empty spots, but we're also chasing away the sea monsters, these figments of the imagination that we fear and worry what's out there. So a question to be asked is, how much do we know that we don't know? And I'm very lucky that in my field, in physics, in cosmology, we know exactly what we don't know. We know that 95% of the universe is missing, so to say. It exists of forms of energy and matter that are completely unknown. We give fancy names to it, dark matter, dark energy. But only 5% of the universe is captured by the equations and concepts and particles and forces and fields that you can study in our great universities. And so I wonder often in other fields of life, what's your percentage of dark matter? What do you know that you don't know? And I think we vastly underestimating what we don't know. And let me make a point. I think that we are in a transition. We are in transition from 2 centuries, essentially. And I would say in the 20th century was the time when we discovered the building blocks of reality. And now we're moving to designing the world using these building blocks. So here you see 2 toy cars. One is metal, the other is made out of Lego blocks. And what's the difference between these 2 toys? Well, if you come back a few weeks later, the first one will still be a car. The other one could turn into an airplane. The whole idea of building blocks is that you can start building. So if we look at nature, for instance, and we have this image of a map of what we know and what is out there, we shouldn't really map what's out there. We should map what can possibly be made. What could be there? What could we design in our labs? Now, nature has, through evolution, created various kind of organisms. But I love to say that each of us, is the winner in a lucky lottery because our DNA was actually chosen to be expressed. And so we are just now coming in this period where we are exploring this vast space of what possibly could be. And these building blocks, actually, you could say, well, in life, they are the genes, it's the DNA, it's the proteins. In matter, it's our atoms and particles. In information, it's our bits and codes. And in each of these three areas, we are just witnessing key breakthroughs in technology. So, for instance, last year, we saw the Nobel Prize in Chemistry going to CRISPR-Cas, the gene editing tool. We had another revolution in quantum technology, building a quantum computer built out of light. And we had terrific applications, also, by the way, in handling COVID, using deep learning and neural networks. And it, of course, goes very fast. DNA, it took essentially 60 years to go from the first discovery of the structure of DNA to the present, where we actually, are able to measure this, quite cheaply. We have massive amount of data coming out of the life sciences. If you, for instance, take the total information in the internet, you could store that in 1 gram of DNA. Digital information roughly doubles every 2 years. Biomedical information doubles every 6 months. And I think actually the past year, it must have grown much faster because there's such an exchange of biomedical data in the pandemic. And of course, this opens terrific opportunities, whether it's personalized medicine or bioengineered materials, gene therapies, or completely redesigning life. In fact, these wonderful messenger RNA vaccines that we're now all looking for to save us. A good example of a technology that was like for 30 years now in the lab has never ever been applied and be improved for human use. And actually, it's these mRNA viruses by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna that actually were the first across the finish line and are currently also the best performing. In fact, you could even argue that we are now moving into an area where the building blocks of life and the building blocks of matter are confluing. They actually are colliding. Our technology is at such small distances in nano and quantum technology that actually we're reproducing life itself. I study quantum theory. It's often seen as a very esoteric subject. It's actually now estimated, that 30% of our economy is based on quantum mechanics. I would love to say 100% of reality, but that means, and it's growing fast. We are witnessing the advent of quantum computers. There was a huge breakthrough in 2019, did something in 200 seconds that would take an ordinary computer 10,000 years. And as I just said, last year, there was another breakthrough now in China. And so there's a real arms race in quantum technology. And of course, all of this is also making use of this huge wave of data that's coming towards us. And we are frightened of big sets of data, but computers love it. It's the fuel, it's the way they grow. And there has been a major shift in computing. If you think about, perhaps you have ever heard about what's called Morovetch Paradox, it essentially says that things that are easy for us are difficult for computers, and things that are difficult for computers are easy for us. So multiplying 200-digit numbers is very difficult for us. It's nothing for a computer, but actually, playing a game of soccer with some young kids is very, very difficult for a computer. And that's because our traditional computers are based on algorithms. They have this, they also never have to sleep. They don't complain. And we know exactly what's going on. While in the human mind, of course, is used, uses neural networks, it's shaped by evolution, it's adaptive, it can learn. And the current trend is, of course, that we're using these technologies of the human mind now in the computer setting. And things like deep learning and machine learning are essentially copying our behavior, our learning to address these very, very difficult problems. So one extremely exciting thing is that now finally we are able to penetrate questions of great complexity, things that have so many different components that the human mind cannot actually understand or see, things that take place in 100,000 dimensional spaces. But actually, computers are able to find structures there. Algorithms are finding their ways. But it raises tons of questions. What kind of problems can be addressed? Can we understand actually what these machines do? And there's this lovely series of in the Wall Street Journal, which is called, I think, Jobs for the Future, Careers for the Future. And it had one item, which was the Robot Psychologist. I love that very much. This was not a psychologist that's being played by a computer. But the point is that, in the end, in order to see whether robots are functioning well, we probably have to interrogate them as we do with human beings. So the machine will have to lie on the sofa and we have to ask him, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And it's really interesting. So there are these tremendous opportunities of building a world of new life, of new matter, of new kinds of information. But I want to end by a few reflections on what does it mean for our society. And I would say all these trends have accelerated dramatically, even in the last year. And I think, what we're moving is in a very different relationship between science on the one hand and society on the other. Now, I think in the old paradigm, science was done by experts. It was behind the high walls of universities and labs. A society saw a few things, but it's essentially it was at a great distance. Now we are moving to a world where the products of science and technology are all around us. It's hard to think of one walk of life that is not influenced. Yet, on the other hand, these technologies become so complicated, so small sometimes, or so complex that we can't see them, we can't understand them. So I think there's a certain risk that science and technology on the one hand are infinitesimally close. They are literally in our pockets. They are in our bloodstream. They might be in our brain at some point. And yet, on the other hand, they are infinitely far because nobody, perhaps apart from a very clever machine, understands exactly what's going on. So I think it's a great threat because I'm extremely optimistic about what science and technology can do, but I'm less optimistic how society can fully capture the benefits. As we have seen in the pandemic too, that everything can be polarized. The ambassador already reflected on that point. There was a wonderful saying this year that says, if you mix science and politics, you get politics. And so how do we deal with that? And how do we actually convey the trust in the scientific method? And we can develop wonderful therapies, medicines, vaccines, etc. But if people are not willing to believe the scientists, to trust the method, then it will be very ineffective. And there was this poll that was published just a month ago, I think. And it shows a general measure of trust. So, essentially what's the percentage of people that have trust, whether it's in institutions or the media, etc. And you see on the left, the trust index among, I think, the 27 largest economies in the informed public, where the Netherlands is actually doing pretty well. And then on the right-hand side, you see the mass population. And you still see that the Netherlands is doing relatively well. We are in the blue. That is to say, even the general population, a majority believes institutions. But you see, particularly in the US and some other countries, quite remarkable, the UK, South Korea, etc., doing extremely badly here. So think the world has a huge trust problem. Um, Now, finally, we all have this connection to the Netherlands, and I want to end, what is the role in the Netherlands in all of that? Now, we're a small country, as I said. It's a shopping area. It's 0.2% of the population. It's roughly 1% of the world economy. And if you count research in terms of impact, it's roughly 3%. So the Netherlands is an important player in higher education and research. Our university system is very highly ranked. I think it's like in the top, it's number 6 or 7 in the world. And one thing I think this new world of the pandemic has shown us, that on the one hand, we all isolated, at least I am, but we're also closely connected. You're all on my Zoom screen, we're all a mouse click away. And so we should start thinking in terms of these networks. And I love this graph. It's a graph of scientific collaborations around the world. And you actually see that Europe, but particularly the Netherlands, is pretty brightly lit up, because Dutch researchers, Dutch students have excellent track record in being part of international collaborations. I think it's a little bit part of our genetic makeup to always seek. It's wonderful that we are here together with all the universities. But I think it's something of a Dutch disease, but it's also a wonderful property that we always seek collaborative partners. And even within Europe, I would say the Netherlands is, as you can see, one of the major hubs in terms of scientific cooperation. And I think that's terrific. That means that, the Netherlands can, be, I would say, something of a role model. I think actually this is what we need. I'm a particle physicist. We have basically only one accelerator in CERN Geneva that we use with the whole world. And I love this collaborative model. Also, I must say that, if you look at competitiveness in terms of innovation, the Netherlands are doing pretty well. In fact, it's the most innovative economy in Europe. It's number 4 in the world. It's just in the same range as countries like the US, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Switzerland. So I think we're doing really well, and we have great opportunities. And I think that's why I also feel this alumni network is so important, because I remember very well when I left the Netherlands 10 years ago, part of me actually felt that I hope people were sorry that I left the country, but there was no such feeling. Actually, I think you're strongly encouraged to go out and conquer the world, or at least connect the world. And I think that's a lovely attitude. So finally, and I'm finished this, I know I'm contractually obliged to end with a quote by Albert Einstein, since he was next door. I love this quote, which says that imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, and imagination embraces the entire world. And I think that's my message for tonight, is this entire world to conquer. And I don't know what happens if children write to Santa Claus, North Pole. I don't know where these postcards end, but I know if they write to Einstein, they actually land on my desk. And so a few years ago, I got this postcard from I think a young boy or girl in New York. On the backside is the Statue of Liberty. And to Albert Einstein, I hope you'll never stop being curious. And I think that's my message to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Robert. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to jump into it. First of all, how do we know that what is captured by physics laws adds up to only 5%? Oh, and you need to turn your sound on.
Yeah, the great thing of Einstein's formula equals mc squared is that, if you anything that has energy has mass. And if it has mass, it has an effect on the curvature and the dynamics of the universe. So by studying the universe, we can compute how much mass is there. And then we can look at all the stars and all the clouds and all the light waves, etc., and add it up. And however creative your bookkeeping is, you will not find more than 5%. So the great thing is that in physics we know there is something out there although we have not a single clue it's not there. It was actually a big surprise. So 15, 20 years ago, the 95% was 0%. We thought we knew exactly what was there to know. So you never know. Perhaps in 10 years, I have to revisit that number, but I'm pretty confident on the 5%.
Hey, we have it recorded. We can see. Okay, second question. Yuval Noah Harari claims that humans are essentially algorithms that can be modified and enhanced in a similar way as deep learning can provide. Curious how you feel neural nets and computer algorithms differ in this sense.
Well, I think, let's first start with the difference between these neural nets and computers. So the great thing of a computer is you can basically open it up and you can look at the code and you know exactly what's doing. Neural nets, you don't know. In the same way, we can't open our heads and see what we are doing. So I think that's a huge problem. In fact, there has been very little theoretical, meaningful results in neural networks that, how are they working? When are they working? And so they have a lot of the same existential questions as us, as we have. Of course, the great thing of the human mind is that we are able not only to learn, but we're also able to jump, so to say, to the next level. We were very good in hunting buffalo or something, and then certainly we decided we can also do cave painting or making music or doing physics. So I think that's something that people still wondering about, whether these neural nets that are now being developed have this kind of this ability to go to another level. But the results are pretty astonishing, and I must also say, in limited context, these deep learning algorithms have been extremely creative. So in game-like settings like chess and Go, they play not only in a way to win, but they play in a way that people are enthusiastic and start playing chess themselves, because it's, they do such wonderful and creative moves.
Okay. Well, you mentioned quantum computing. So we have a question. What do you expect to be the impact of quantum computing on the way we work, future of work, and us as human resources?
Well, I think in quantum computing, we are there for the long run. So first of all, I think, it's quantum computing is a very narrow slice of what quantum technology will bring. I think of it more as being electricity. So, at the moment we start using the technology that nature itself uses in its atoms, in its molecules, we can build, so many different machines. But perhaps, the killer application is a general purpose quantum computer, which means that, we'll have the computing power to address many issues of huge complexity that nature itself can also only solve using quantum theory. Like, for instance, if you want to predict in advance whether a certain molecule will be an effective drug, there's no way you can compute this with ordinary computers. You can try it out in the lab. So you can, with quantum computers, you can solve these material questions. You can find, magical materials that we need, new technology that the ambassador also mentioned we definitely need to address big societal issues like climate change. So now you will essentially have infinite computing power. But I think that might be some time away. I think what you will see in the coming years are more purpose machines. So these will be machines that can do one thing, and they can do it very well, and will be very effective. But they won't be able to play like computer games at the same time. So it's more like the equivalent of an electric drill than of an electric computer, I think.
Okay, well, I have a question that's totally in a different direction. The question is, what are things that common people, although well-educated like us, can do to improve science integration in the society?
That's a wonderful question. Well, I think, by the way, you can do something, but scientists themselves can also do something. And for me, the key lesson is that, it's very natural for us to focus on the products, on the results of what we found. The latest particle, a new explosion, exploding star, a new drug, a new machine. And we spend not enough time explaining what science exactly is, what the scientific method is. So I feel every child that does an experiment at home or in school experiences what the scientific method is, right? Because you can try it out, you can see it with your own eye, you can try it again. And so I think we should spend much more time on the inner workings of science than on the products, because it's guaranteed that some things are so complicated that perhaps a handful of people in the world will understand it. It's totally so I think we won't be able to understand the results, but we will understand the methods by which scientists work. And I think actually the scientific method is something that we can use in our own lives. I think, by the way, it's a very good thing that people are critical, that people are asking questions, and I think we should answer these questions. Sometimes it's said that people become like proto-scientists. They start to wonder about why is the world as it is. The thing is, you need experts to tell you which parts are very well established and which are kind of open, interesting questions. And I think that's where we need a lot of understanding of the inner workings of science.
Okay, well, we have a more personal question. How much time do you spend on your own PhD science? Or do you see other fields that are now intriguing you more? So it's also a bit of a sensitive question.
It is, yeah. So there's always this question about, being broad or deep, and I would say, I have two minds. So I love to dive into the kind of theoretical physics that I know well and can do. Actually, if you want to make an original contribution, it helps to have a lot of experience. Also, I feel most scientists are finely tuned instruments that resonate with a certain sound. So for me, it's the sound of complicated math and gravity and particles. On the other hand, I'm so fascinated what's happening in the world of science these days, and I love to go to general talks in whether it's computing or social science or the humanities. It's one of the amazing facts of the modern life is that all of that is accessible, and I think you can all find wonderful lectures online, and you can interact with people, and so yeah, it's the famous T-shaped personality, I think.
Okay, well, another question is, how do you see the coming together of psychology, sociology, and exact sciences, such as physics, mathematics, and increasingly biology?
Well, is there a grand unified theory of all fields? I think it's a fact that extremely exciting work is happening these days on the interface of these disciplines. And I think, as I said with my robot psychologist, technology is needing the social scientists, but the social sciences are, of course, much more interacting with technology. Now, one thing I think also this pandemic learned us, it's not enough to understand virology or medicine, but behavioral sciences, communication sciences, economics, it all connects to each other. And one of the wonderful thing I feel, if I see many of my students and the young people, is that they are pretty oblivious to all the internal divisions we have in universities. There's a famous saying that the world has problems, the university has departments, and there's sometimes a misfit. And but one thing I see that the newer generations actually are extremely fluent in more than one language, and I think they vote with their feet and they go to where the most exciting stuff is happening, and a lot of it is happening in between and across disciplines.
Okay, I'll ask you one last question. Unfortunately, we would love to ask you more questions, but we don't have enough time. Last question, given the current geopolitical climate, where there are fundamental disagreements on which ethical framework should apply in various scenarios, how do we ensure that technologies do not perpetuate, whether intentionally or not, disinformation?
Well, that's, it's a very important question. I'm often reminded of, the dual aspects of technology. So honestly, this is not Einstein's room. Was Oppenheimer's room for 20 years that I'm sitting in right now. And just here outside my door, in his time, there were 2 US Marines next to a big safe, which essentially had the secrets to destroy the world. So he, I think, needed not be reminded. There is a flip side, a dark side to this wonderful nuclear physics. And I think, this ethical, moral issues are absolutely crucial. And I'm worried about, how the world is addressing this. I think there are 2 models. There's essentially the US models, where it's essentially in the hands of large corporations. That try to behave, but they're driven by numbers, clicks, likes, profits. There's a Chinese model where basically the government takes that role. And I think Europe is trying to develop an alternative to this, where technology is developed in more as a common good, as a public good, where these kind of ethical dimensions are built in from the start. It's wonderful that people try to do this, but it's something that we all should worry about. I worry a lot about issues about privacy, about where the data is. As I said, we all worry about a digital footprint, but as I showed in my presentation, the real growth of data is actually in the life sciences, in health, and we have seen this year, of course. And where things are moving incredibly fast, there are a lot of ethical questions. There is a long tradition in science of asking advice after the fact instead of before. That's what nuclear physicists discovered to their dismay, I would say so. Science is also very bad in passing this message along. So often every field has to discover this for itself. I think it's very important that all these technologies that I mentioned today are being developed in concert with the general public. And so if I say it's good that scientists connect to the public, it's not so much that, well, I want to broadcast my view. I think actually the public should broadcast their view and interact what's happening in science and technology. And actually that would be a very fruitful way also to close that gap. Because if you actually have a role to play, then actually you become a stakeholder in these developments and not just a victim or a consumer.
Okay, Robert, thanks. Let me now pass this along to my colleague from Utrecht. Willemijn, are you?
Yes, I'm here. I already unmuted myself.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Robert. I'm not sure if you've seen the chat, but there are many words of praise for your talk and also more questions than we had the time to ask you. So I think that shows a lot of gratitude for you giving your time for us here this evening. And based on everyone here, on behalf of everyone here and on behalf of Utrecht University, I want to thank you for your time. And we will send a little token of our appreciation. I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen. It's a plate of our limited edition porcelain with science. And I think the picture is a bit unclear, but the illustration shows the curve of a diagram which proves that the inner core of our planet is solid, which is based on UU research by a seismologist. And I think that very well suits your talk. So this will be on its way to your office. Thank you very much. And I hope you can stay a little bit longer after this as well.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Good to see all of you.